Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PCFX Fan Club Game Translation Request Survey Results. Bit of a mouthful there. But yeah, thank you for your patience on us getting these things put together. A couple weeks ago, we did a survey, basically trying to get a better idea of like what people want to see out of the PCFX. The PCFX is a system that is very heavily reliant on narrative to enjoy, or a narrative in terms of like what its game content's doing, right? Even the action games have a lot of voice acting, a lot of dialogue, right? And connecting with these characters is a big part of what the PCFX is about, right? And so doing that outside of your own native language is a really challenging thing. So, we're really thankful to the group so far who have, spent their time translating games for the PCFX, giving us opportunities to play these games in a form that is, actually pretty close to, what they were originally intended to be, right? As close, I think, as we can without, directly reading Japanese and things like that, right? So I think fan translation is a really important part for telling the story of what the PCFX is. But it is also very challenging because it is a system that does not have, a lot of work going on it all the time, right? I think one of the reasons that we keep a slower cadence of content is because, there's only so much to talk about with the PCFX to some extent. So yeah, but just to get through this like a PowerPoint presentation, it's not very complicated or very fancy. It is just like basically a couple slides here or a few slides. But just to let people know, if you didn't listen to the Team Innocent podcast and like the origin of this translation survey, this is not an announcement of any kind of translation that's going to be done, right? We are not a fan translation group for the PCFX, or the PCFX fan club is not. We are happy to host kind of groups that are interested in doing fan translations, and we're happy to try to accommodate you, the best we can, right? Setting up as many, connections as we can, getting people in contact with people if possible, and like if there's like a Discord group that needs to be set up, we're happy to do that within the PCFX fan club, right? But like I have no control over, what kind of things get worked on, right? So, and I think part of that is, I think the PCFX as a system is always kind of short on probably people doing things for it. I mean, as much as I said earlier that like we kind of keep a slower cadence of release of content, there's a lot of stuff on PCFX that still needs to be talked about, right? So there's a lot of ways I think people can contribute to the PCFX. So I know this is like a horribly old meme, but I think if you ever are sitting there and being like, hey, I would love to see something out of the PCFX, a lot of times just like strap it or getting your boots, pulling your bootstraps up, right, is a big part of it. So if you can do something, just do it. I don't even remember this guy's name, but I saw his face in my head with Rolfie hair, so I wanted to create that image. So anyways, there he is. People are doing awesome things, right? We have like David Shadoff and Sauce doing homebrew development, right? For fan translations, obviously we have the team that worked on Team Innocent with, Derek, Josh, and a lot of legacy work with like things like Elmer and Espernite and all that stuff. But also, maybe a good example of somebody just kind of doing it, Paul Daniel, he doesn't have, a lot of resources available to him, but he has really kind of, I feel like, in my opinion, seems like he kind of brute forced his way into getting some kind of translation for the game he's interested on the system. So we'll talk a little bit about, I will give a little overview of the current translations already available on the system. So, but yeah, but then even beyond like more technical work like that, right? I think one thing I might mention today, there's like a particular game I want to kind of like highlight in this results. I do think making sure people are aware of certain games actually plays a role in like how likely it is people are to look at a game and how likely people are to translate it. So if you want to create content around PCFX, that's a huge help. Archiving stuff, Game Vacanti does a lot of uploads of like Blue Breaker stuff and things like that. So even just like posting art online, I think can be helping, drive interest. And then also, being a part of the community, I think any community helps people stay engaged with the platform, right? If PCFX is this ongoing conversation that you have, I think that is something that you can help with. So if you're already doing these things, awesome. I appreciate it. Cool. If you have something you want to do, again, do it, and we'll be happy to assist you as best we can. But I'm just a man with a podcast, so So to go over the submission data here real quick, just so you're aware, this is originally intended to be something that was going to be specifically for the PCFX fan club. And then me and Matt were like, hey, maybe we'll put it out on Twitter and we'll get some additional attention on it. And like, maybe we'll get an extra like 10 or 20 submissions. But it got out there a lot larger. Time Extension published it. And so in total, we had about 318 respondents. And we allowed everybody to choose up to 5 games. So not everybody, I think, chose their full 5 games. I don't know how to math. Don't make me math right now. But in total, there was 1,386 votes across the games. We did remove games that were already considered translated or partially translated releases. We did not include any PCFX GA titles, which is the PC card stuff. And we did not include Anime Freak Volume 1 through 6. Those are really digital magazines. And while I think there is an argument to be made about like, hey, this is something that should be translated and experienced as is, I think in this case, it didn't really feel like it was probably in line with what we were trying to figure out through this, right? And I think also Anime Freak, there's a lot of things you could probably translate individually in there and get a lot of information out of. So we did remove that. Just as a heads up, that's just the decision we made on that. So, just to quickly go over the existing translation stuff on the PCFX, obviously, chances are, if you've played any translations on the PCFX, you're probably very aware. Welcome to Pia Carrot is like in a, I forget what number state it is. I think it's like a beta release though. But it is pretty much completely playable from start to finish, as is in English. There's a couple little hiccups you'll run into, but that is probably the title that would get you the best idea of like what are romantic adventure games or dating sims or how you want to categorize it, and that were popular in the system and things like that. Obviously, we had the Team Innocent stuff recently. That is, really well done and basically finished outside the the FMVs being inserted in the game. And then the last one is Chojin Heki's Roigar. I think it was like Sam I Am, Elmer, and Esper Knight. I don't remember the full list of people who worked on that. But that's all been translated. But the other thing is partial translations as well. So Farland Story FX, I played through the translation of that, and it's pretty much just menu translation, so it helps you get through the inventory, what weapons are, what stats are, things like that. Paul Daniel, as I mentioned earlier, has been doing work on Queen of Queens. I believe that is an ongoing project he's doing. The last version I saw, it was primarily translating the moves in the game. And I believe he also ran the manual through a machine translation as well to try to give a better understanding of how to play that game. And the last one is Doo-Doo-Dee-Da-Doo-Da, which I feel like doesn't get enough attention, I will say. And maybe that's something I need to help try to remedy at some point. But Doo-Doo-Dee-Da-Doo-Da is, again, a menu translation, so the FMVs aren't translated. I think the interesting thing about Doo-Doo-Dee-Da-Doo-Da is that if we had a playlist on YouTube with the FMV cutscenes translated, I could be wrong, but I think that would basically put the game in the same situation as Team Innocent at that point. I think there's maybe like 2 or 3 voice lines otherwise in the game, but it's been a long time since I've played it. So anyways, these games are generally very playable, I will say, but you just will run into some hurdles and things like that. So we're going to start with the top 5 games that got ranked basically on this list, just to kind of highlight, what titles seem to be the most desirable. And then we're going to go through a couple different additional categories of games to look at. Number 5 is we got Dragon Knight 4. I know very little about Dragon Knight 4, but they got 60 votes total. And I looked into this a little bit. If you don't know what it is, it's like a strategy RPG. Strategy. I know I say the word strategy weird, but I've been trying to fix it. Now I can't remember what the right way is to say it. But it is kind of like one of those games, and it has some like semi-erotic elements. It has the yellow 18 label, which isn't like 18 plus required, but like 18 plus recommended, basically. I believe there is like a little bit of cleavage shot early on, or maybe full exposure. I don't remember. But I did look into this because this is a game that appears on a variety of platforms, and I did not see any fan translations that were complete from what I remember. I believe I saw that a PC98 translation started work, but I do not think that finished. So that is a game that, if it did get translated on the PCFX, I believe would end up being the first version of that game to be in English. But again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Very simple level of research on that. Number 4 is Kishindoki Zenki? Kishin Doji Zenki? There we go. I think that's what it is. Which is the beat 'em up. I was really surprised by this. And maybe it's because like a different way that I kind of look at games. Where I think in my head, when I think about like the translations I would want on a PCFX, I think about the games where I'd get the most value out of a translation, right? And in the case of Kishin Doji Zenki, like, I think this game is very good. No, very good. It is a very, I think it's a pretty decent beat 'em up on the system. And I think you can really appreciate it for what it's doing, right? There's a lot of like voiceover going on, like as you're going through this very like high speed, fast paced, roller coaster ride of a game, right? And unfortunately, it's one of those games that I don't believe has any like subtitle text. I believe it's like off the top of my head. So I think it would be challenging because I think you'd have to insert the text somehow. But I was a little surprised it ended up on this list. But I think part of it, a lot of the PCFX library, I think, is something that are like games that people don't really know. So it could be just one of those games that like people know what it is and they would like to see it like kind of completed out and finished out, right? So I was a little surprised to see that rank as high as it did. Number 3 was Last Imperial Prince. We have a lot of generally, I think, pretty good impressions of this game in the Discord. I believe JP Engine did a review on this one. And I think a couple other people have talked about this game. It's like kind of like a side-scrolling action RPG kind of thing. I haven't gotten very deep into the game myself, but it is a PCFX exclusive, similar to Kishin Doji Zenki. And it sounds like, from what I've seen, it is playable without knowing Japanese, but it's one of those, being a narrative RPG game, I think it would probably benefit quite a bit from having a translation, from what little I know about the game. I think this is a game that also has a little bit of a historical significance because I think, hopefully I'm not wrong about this, I believe somebody who worked at Falcom at some point was involved in this project. So I believe people kind of put this one a little bit more on a pedestal because it has that history with kind of a niche kind of thing these days. I mean, like Falcom is not the biggest company still, but I think within the people who care about the PCFX, I think very relevant overall. Number 2 is Power Dolls FX. And Power Dolls is a series that I always hear there's like a strong fan base for. I don't know anybody who's a Power Dolls fan, but it is I'm sure there's people in the Discord who are. But, being it is a mech series kind of thing, I can definitely understand the appeal already, right? I'm a fan of Pat Labor a little bit. And so to some extent, like this game visually reminds me a little bit of Pat Labor in a lot of ways, of just like kind of not like Gundam in space kind of thing, but this kind of like more grounded environment where mechs kind of play a role. And I think I've always kind of appreciated that kind of thing. But being a strategy RPG, it is another strategy RPG, right? RPG heavy is, I think, the thing that I have noticed on the kind of like top level here of the top 5 games. But again, I think with the people who would be interested in the PCFX, there are probably a lot of like RPG fans overall. And then lastly, number 1, maybe unsurprisingly, and I think pretty much everybody on the Team Innocent podcast predicted this, maybe Daryl Langresser, which as far as I'm aware is basically Langresser 2. I think it is like a remake of the Sega Genesis Langresser game, but I believe they did a lot to kind of like expand this game out. And there are, I think, multiple versions across multiple platforms. And I think something that I've always kind of wondered about Daryl Langresser is because I knew there's a lot of versions, and I know the most recent Daryl Langresser 1 and 2 translations that came out on the Switch are like fully official, right? Those are modern versions of those games. And I knew they had like a classic mode. So part of me was like, well, I don't really know what the strength of like doing a translation of Daryl Langresser would be beyond, if you're just like me and a weird, like real hardware sicko where you just want to play everything on old hardware, right? And like there's a value in that, don't get me wrong. But it is one of those things I was wondering. And so I went and tried out the demo to Langresser 1 and 2. I was like, is this one of those things where it's just like people just kind of like being invested in it just because it is on the original platform. But Langresser 1 and 2 on the more medium, like it's PC, Switch, and things like that. The classic mode, from what I saw, from what I did in the settings, is not like a full classic mode. It changes some of the art, and I think it changes the music. But like the user interface and the character sprites and all that stuff do not go back to the original versions. And that game has a very I don't know if you guys have ever seen, I don't know how popular it is, but the Fire Emblem mobile game, these very kind of chibi, high quality art character designs. And, Langresser, Der Langresser on the PCN or PCFX is, very much, I think, a one of those games that have really nice looking sprite work, right? It also has animated cutscenes. I can't remember if that's original to this title. I think it was original to this one, and then it got ported over to the Saturn. Hopefully I'm not just making stuff up here. But yes, so that was the game that got the number one. And I think Filler, or Matt, successfully predicted that. So, I think it's maybe not too surprising that RPGs are kind of the top level things here. So I did want to look at the runner-ups. So if, just to go back and kind of note the gap here, number 5 got about 60 votes, right? And everything else got somewhere between 70 to 80, and then Der Langresser was pretty far ahead, almost 100 votes there. So the runners up before this, the 10 through 6 or whatever, were actually really close as well to these numbers. Blue Breaker, Blue Breaker does have other versions of other systems. None of them are in English. That was the number 6 one. If you don't know, that's the kind of dating RPG that was kind of, I guess you could say, the killer app seemingly for the system, but it did get a Saturn and PlayStation port at some point. Boundary Gate, which is a 3D RPG kind of game as well, also appears on other systems as well, but I'm actually not sure if the PCFX version was the original one for that or not, but still, I think it's most impressive on the PCFX because it is using 3D in a way that most other games on the system don't do. Where, on PlayStation, I believe it's a PlayStation version, a lot of games do 3D on there. So Boundary Gate, I think, is a more visually distinct game on the PCFX overall. Cutie Honey, Tenchi Muyo, I believe those games probably have the strength of their IP behind them more than anything. I don't know how much people care for those particular games at this point, right? I don't know how many people look at the Cutie Honey game and say, yes, I want to play that. I'd be curious to know. Tenchi Muyo, both games, so it's actually technically 2 games, the Tenchi Muyo one. They're both adventure games overall too as well. So I would be curious to know in that case as well, how much people know about those games versus recognize the IP. And number 10, the last one, is Miraculum, The Last Revelation. That is a true PCFX exclusive RPG as well. And that scored pretty high. And I think Miraculum has always kind of gotten around. I've always been surprised how much Miraculum has stood out to people. I think it is just one of those kind of it just looks like a really solid 16-bit RPG kind of thing with voice acting. And I think out of all the titles, it is maybe one of the most familiar looking RPGs, maybe in the same way that Der Langresser looks familiar to other RPGs as well, right? Even Last Imperial Prince and what's that game called? I already forgot. Power Dolls, I think, don't look super like normal video games. They kind of do, but they're a little bit off in the way that I feel like PCFX games often are a little bit off. And I think Dragon Knight 4 looks like regular games, or more like a regular RPG as well. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, so I think these came up pretty close afterwards though. I did want to look at other PCFX exclusives because I thought this was interesting. So, this is not, the full list. This is me just kind of singling out generally what a PCFX exclusive is. There's some exceptions here, Nurgens, I think, has a Power VR PC version or whatever. So there may be some exceptions like that on the system. And I didn't I've never done a full overview of what are all the PCFX exclusives and how exclusive are they? Are they actually original titles on the PCFX? Are they substantially altered versions of games and things like that as well? But I think generally these are games that kind of are mostly standalone on the PCFX. But Battle Heat, got pretty high on the list as well. It was, I think just being a launch title and then also being part of that kind of like initial Team Innocent crowd played a role. And it is a game that has more of like a aesthetic that I think would appeal to, I think, the people who are looking at the PCFX generally. Like Graduation 2, the other launch game, Neo Generations, right? That is a very like school simulator, raise these girls kind of thing, right? And I think that is something that is not as appealing. And there's also an English version of that as well that was on the PC in the US with like a full dub. Although I think the sound balancing of it's pretty bad. I'd be curious if anybody's like actually done a patch to fix the sound balancing of that game at all, or you just play that Windows version and it's all good. Tengai Makio also landed pretty high. If you don't know, Tengai Makio is a FMV fighting game on the PCFX, so I assume that scored pretty high, primarily due to the name brand as well on there. But the thing that really caught me off guard was Sparkling Feather. Sparkling Feather got 32. Now, as you may have, known from the PCFX or the Sparkling Feather podcast we did, I love Sparkling Feather. I love it with all my heart. It's not a game I expect people to be interested in. So the fact it got 32 votes already, I think is interesting. I think it tells me two things. So two things kind of happen. One, we had the Sparkling Feather podcast. And to be some inside baseball, I feel like since the Sparkling Feather podcast, there's been a lot more mentions of Sparkling Feather in the PCFX fan club Discord that I have noticed that are not like me bringing up Sparkling Feather anymore. So I think in doing the podcast, we did do some more like name brand recognition for that thing. But also I've been doing some like Twitter posts, and probably the most successful Twitter post we had was one involving Sparkling Feather. It's like the thing I always talk about, like the little like animals at the zoo voice acting things, right? And that actually got quite a bit of traction, and a lot of people in that comment section for that video that we did on Twitter, were like, what is this? Does it have a translation? Will it get a translation? Which was not the response I expected out of like what I thought was just like a silly little video. So I think what this tells me, assuming there's no other external Sparkling Feather factors I have not accounted for, Sparkling Feather Dark Matter, that there is probably room for some of these games to have a higher presence on people's mind. So the reason I say that is because some games on this list, in my opinion, probably, and this is like where, maybe again, we come back to like my idea of like what is a good fan translation might be different than other people's idea of like, I want a translation for a game I want to play, or I'm like, what is the most value I'm getting out of a translation, right? And I think things like Megami Tengoku 2 getting only 15 to me is just like, oh, that's a little harsh. But also, I feel like even though Ojo-sama Susomu, a game that is, I think, very playable in English, I think it has a lot of benefit from being in English as well. Or sorry, very playable in Japanese. But I think it's a lot of benefit being in English as well. And that got 17. And I think Ojo-sama Susomu is probably the more appealing game to most people than Sparkling Feather. It's not an RPG, I'll give you that. So this is just my theory. Does not mean that this is true. But I think what this tells me is that, like, in covering these games more, maybe the games that I'm seeing here on this list that are rated lower, that I think have a lot of potential on the PCFX, could benefit the most from getting some more attention. So that might drive some of the decision making I make about like what kind of content we cover when in the future, kind of thing. So yeah, but otherwise, these games all kind of ranked pretty low on the list here. Minimum Mnemonic is a game that I think out of everyone I know, I believe I've only really heard Matt talk about it. And I don't necessarily know what Matt even likes about it. So I feel like that game is maybe the most representative of just like, I don't know if anyone knows what this is. I don't know if anybody cares what it is. And that includes me, which tells me there probably is something that we need to look at there. Because it's like, if you don't know, it's like a little like visual novel story where you're like 3 girls and you get like shrunk down, I believe, and you're going around and like there's like a Akira toy or something like that. It's like a cute little story. I don't know where it goes. I played maybe the first hour of it or 2 hours of it when Matt was like, you should play this. I was like, okay, sure. So I wonder, because knowing that Matt knows more about that, maybe that's something we should talk about a little bit more. So, and then unfortunately, Josh, Konpeki no Kantai, biggest fan, only found 3 friends in his decision. So yeah. But anyways, I just thought it was interesting that some of these games, I think, probably have potential to rank quite a bit higher. Princess Rolfie, that game as well, like Rolfie being the mascot of the PCFX, I feel like that should be a little higher as well. But anyways, that's it for the presentation. Let me pull up the, don't look at my, don't ask questions about what's on the background right there. It's complicated. Let me pull up the actual results here real quick. So here's the actual like straight results that we have here. So, you know, for the most part, it's a pretty steady trickle down here through this. So, you know, I think we covered all the big stuff overall, and anything in this middle here area, I don't think has any like specifically strong like I don't know. I don't have anything specifically strong to say about it, I guess. Strong is a real weird word to say. Maybe Angelique Special ranking significantly higher than the other Angelique games here. Maybe being the biggest one, especially since Angelique Tenku no Requiem is an Angelique RPG. So I feel like that would also be more relevant. So I think ultimately, my feeling on this is that this is a list that I think makes a lot of sense for, you know, I think what people are looking for out of the PCFX. And again, I'm not the one who makes a decision about like what happens where, when, and why. So I'm not sitting here just deciding who's making what. But and I'll have the full list if you want to look at it. We'll put a post up and we'll archive the spreadsheet so you guys can pull whatever you want out of it if you ever want to for any reason. But I think what this tells me as somebody who covers this stuff is there's a lot of work that probably can be done to kind of raise the profile of a lot of these kind of like more PCFX specific games. Because I think I would have liked to see something that's a little bit more rounded. But again, I think RPGs makes a lot of sense that people would be really into RPGs. So I have weird taste in games, so that's part of it. And I think, you know, Matt is also like a big RPG guy, and he cares a lot about this stuff on the system as well. So yeah, anyways. A lot of flavor commentary there. But anyways, thank you guys so much for voting in this. Thank you so much for, you know, giving us your thoughts on what you wanted to see. If you have any thoughts about the results yourself, I would love to hear what you think at the end of the day. So give me a little bit of that, however you want to reach out, whether you want to talk about it in the Discord or, you know, comments or something like that. I would love to hear what your thought is if you go over the list and look at it. But again, you know, a lot of stuff requires people to make it happen. So if you're feeling like wanting to make something happen, you can do it. But for now, we'll keep trying to build the PCFX fan club and build that community so people stay excited about the PCFX. That is my goal still. So anyways, thank you so much for coming. Hope you guys have a great week. Bye.